At the top of your hand, you can probably come up with a long list of haters. But they're nothing compared to history's biggest haters. Let's start with number 6, Guy de Maupassant. I bet you can't think of Paris without picturing the Eiffel Tower. Yeah, me neither. But if it was up to Guy de Maupassant, the wrought iron tower would have never seen the light of day. Guy de Maupassant was a French writer born in the 1850s, and he was kind of a big deal. He wrote 300 short stories, 6 novels, 3 travel books, and 1 volume of verse. When the plans to construct the Eiffel Tower became public knowledge, Maupassant was simply horrified, and he wasn't the only one. Nearly all the Parisian writers and artists were not in support of erecting the tower. In fact, they hated the idea so much that they got together, formed a group of tower haters, and wrote a letter about it. In the letter, they stated that the tower would make Paris terribly ugly and bring dishonor to the city. Apparently, chill pills had not been invented at this time. Seeing how the Eiffel Tower is standing tall today, it's pretty obvious that the protests of the anti-tower individuals didn't get them anywhere. So, if a bunch of people formed a circle to hate on the tower together, why is Maupassant being singled out? Well, in his final act of defiance, Maupassant waited until the tower was completed and began to have lunch there every day for years. When asked why, Maupassant made it very clear that he chose the restaurant not because he particularly enjoyed the food, but because being inside the structure was the only way for him to avoid having to look at it. Maupassant eventually passed away in 1893, 4 years after the tower was completed. Number 5, Ludwig van Beethoven. Beethoven was one of the greatest composers and musicians of his time, but he is on this list for an entirely different reason: his burning hatred for Napoleon Bonaparte. Like many other instances of burning hatred, the tale of Beethoven and Napoleon started out as one of great admiration. According to some accounts, Beethoven admired Napoleon very much and considered him a hero. In fact, the admiration was so great that the musician named his 3rd symphony after Napoleon, who was, at the time, the first consul of France. He called the piece Sinfonia intitolata Bonaparte, which translates to Symphony entitled Bonaparte. Just when Beethoven was done putting the final touches to the masterpiece in the early months of 1804, news got to him that Napoleon has declared himself Emperor of France. When he heard the news, Beethoven was furious, and he let out a string of very colorful words. He basically said he thought Napoleon was different, but he had turned out to be a greedy man only interested in his own ambition. Where have I heard that before? Beethoven was so enraged that in his anger, he walked over to the completed score and scribbled out the title so aggressively that he tore through the paper. He eventually changed the name of the piece to the Heroic Symphony. It is said that Beethoven went about the rest of his life harboring a deep hatred for the legendary commander. Before we move on, you should probably take this with a pinch of salt because historians have found some irregularities in the story. Whatever the case, there was clearly some animosity between the two, because Beethoven's violent erasure of the original title can still be seen on the manuscript cover. Number 4, Jonathan Swift and John Partridge. Jonathan Swift was an Anglo-Irish satirist, author, essayist, and political pamphleteer. He was also the biggest hater of the early 1700s. At the time, Swift was a cleric in the Church of Ireland, and so it's easy to see why he wasn't particularly fond of anyone who made fun of the church. Enter John Partridge, an English astrologer, author, and publisher, whose favorite pastime was, you guessed it, mocking the church. You could say Partridge was a pretty big hater of the church. When Partridge was not making controversial statements about the church, he was publishing almanacs containing his predictions about the death of famous people, which almost never came true. This just served to further infuriate Swift, and so it was only a matter of time before he decided to teach Partridge a lesson. Shortly after, Partridge published yet another almanac of fake predictions. Swift took on the pen name Isaac Bickerstaff and published his own almanac predicting that Partridge would die on March 29th at around 11 p.m. When Partridge caught wind of the publication, he released a statement claiming that Bickerstaff was nothing but a deceitful cheat. Well, if it isn't the pot calling the kettle black. When the day came, Partridge was very much alive, but that didn't stop Swift from putting out a publication declaring him dead. What's worse is that other publications and authors went along with it and began reporting that Bickerstaff's prediction had come true. Even when it came to light that Partridge was alive and healthy, his death continued to be a running joke for several years. Number 3, Xerxes the Great. Xerxes I, also known as Xerxes the Great, was a 5th century king of the Persian Empire who really liked to get his way. But hey, when you're a king, I guess that can happen. When Xerxes I didn't get his way, no one and nothing was safe, not even bodies or water. In 400, Xerxes had just successfully quelled uprisings against Persian rule in Egypt and Babylon, and he was feeling on top of the world, so he decided to take on Greece. The fastest way to get his troops to Greece was to go through the Dardanelles Strait, separating Asia from Europe, and Xerxes was determined to do just that. He gave the order for a pontoon bridge to be constructed along a 1.2-kilometer strait, but before his troops could get across, a storm blew in and damaged it. Xerxes was so enraged by the incident that he decided to punish the culprit, the sea. He ordered his men to whip the sea with chains 300 times and poke it with red-hot irons. He also ordered his men to cuff the sea while administering the punishment. When they failed to accomplish that for obvious reasons, Xerxes' men settled for tossing handcuffs into the water. As bizarre as it already sounds, that's not the end. Xerxes was still not pacified, even after meting out punishment to the sea, and so he ordered the execution of all the engineers behind the bridge's construction. Number 2. J. Edgar Hoover. When J. Edgar Hoover served as the first director of the FBI, he was not above using his position to harass the one person he hated the most, John Steinbeck. Steinbeck was an American writer who won the 1962 Nobel Prize in Literature and wrote 33 books in his lifetime. Hoover's hatred for Steinbeck stemmed from the fact that he believed Steinbeck was a communist and a threat to national security. This belief was not completely baseless because Steinbeck joined a communist organization called the League of American Writers in 1935. So, yeah, Hoover was onto something. For many years, Hoover tried and failed to find evidence of any illegal activities connected to Steinbeck. The lack of evidence meant he couldn't arrest and prosecute Steinbeck, but it didn't stop him from devising a new means to make the writer's life a living hell. Using his influence, Hoover encouraged the U.S. Internal Revenue Service to audit Steinbeck's taxes every single year of his life, just to piss him off. This major inconvenience frustrated Steinbeck to no end, and so in 1942, he wrote a letter to United States Attorney General Francis Biddle, and it read, "Do you suppose you could ask Edgar's boys to stop stepping on my heels? They think I'm an enemy alien. It's getting tiresome." Number 1. Jeanne de Clisson. Jeanne de Clisson is by far the biggest hater on this list, and with good reason. Jeanne, popularly known as the Lioness of Brittany, was a French noblewoman who lived a life so tumultuous that it would make for a great Netflix show. After her first 2 marriages ended following the deaths of her husbands, Jeanne married Olivier IV de Clisson, a well-respected member of French society. For a while, it seemed like she had found her happily ever after, but it all came crashing down when Olivier IV de Clisson was accused of treason and executed by order of King Philip VI of France. This time around, Jeanne was not in a hurry to wed a 4th husband. She had found a new purpose: vengeance. To avenge her deceased husband, Jeanne sold the de Clisson estates, used the money to purchase 3 warships, and raised a force of about 400 loyal men. When she had all that she needed, she embarked on a 13-year pirating tirade targeting only French vessels. When she did find one, she would kill everyone on board and leave one sailor alive to proclaim the gospel of her vengeance. When Jeanne finally retired and tied the knot for the 4th time, she wedded Sir Walter Bentley, a man who had personally fought against Charles de Blois, the person she believed had a hand in her 3rd husband's execution. That's it for this video. See you in the next one.